Washington Journal continues.
Congressman Jim Himes is back at our desk. A Democrat from Connecticut, serves on the House Intelligence Committee. I want to start, of course, with the deal that came together last night to avert a government shutdown on border security. We're talking $1.375 billion for border barriers. Are you going to support this deal?
You know, a little hard to say because, like everybody else, I've gotten, 3 or 4 top lines on the deal. But let me start by saying this. Look, it is great that there's a deal out there, right? At just about all costs, I think we need to avoid another shutdown. The 35-day shutdown, of course, was devastating for millions of people around this country. So, from what I've heard, sounds like it's got a little bit of money for border barriers, things that we use today. There was a last-minute debate on the number of beds out there. It sounds like there's been an agreement on that. So I'm at least encouraged, without the details, that we've got a deal that hopefully will avert a shutdown.
I want to circle back to the beds in a second, but on the border barriers themselves, there are Democrats who have said not $1 for President Trump's wall. Are they going to be able to support what's in this deal?
The wall conversation has gotten really wild, right? So what is President Trump's wall? President Trump's wall, as he described it during the campaign, was a wall that would extend all the way across the southern border from the Caribbean to the Pacific, and it would be a big, beautiful 30-foot concrete wall that would be paid for by Mexico. I think we're a very, very long way from that. I think we're in the realm of sort of reasonable border security. If you go to a place like San Diego, where I happened to have been a couple of weeks ago, you'll see that in densely urban areas, we do have walls, and we've got fencing, and we've got steel slats and that sort of thing. So speaking for myself, if there's money to do more of what we know works in dense urban areas, if there's areas where you need more barriers, I think that's fine. That's a long, long distance from the big, beautiful wall from the Caribbean to the Pacific that would be paid for by Mexico.
Explain this detention bed issue, some confusion on that, and concern by some who believe Democrats brought this up at the end here of the negotiations.
Yeah, I can't speak to the process of when it came up, but I can sort of tell you the underlying issue. The underlying issue is the more beds you have, the more people you can detain and hold. And the Democrats worry about 2 things. Number one, that people who are here to apply for asylum, because remember, you have people who are crossing the border illegally, usually because they're looking for for a job that they can't get wherever it is that they come from. There are also people who are fleeing violence and who are seeking asylum. Those are people you don't put into detention. You adjudicate their cases. You find out whether they've got a credible fear at home. And the concern of the Democrats is twofold. Number one, that the more beds you have, the more you get away from detaining people who are real threats, people who are violent, who are members of gangs, and you get into possibly detaining people who are simply seeking asylum or people who pose no threat whatsoever. Obviously immigration is a very emotional debate. The government doesn't begin to have the resources to detain whatever the number is today, 11 million people who are here on an undocumented basis. And so the question is, who do you detain? And most people, certainly the Democrats, say you detain the people who are a threat to their communities because they're criminal, because they're violent, and that sort of thing.
Congressman Jim Himes with us until the bottom of the hour. If you want to join in the conversation, phone lines are open. Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, Independents 202-748-8002. The clock is still ticking to that Friday deadline at midnight. If this deal isn't passed by both the House and Senate, signed by the president, the government would still partially shut down again. Can you just walk through the timing here and the process? Who goes first, the House or Senate, and how will this happen?
I'm not sure who goes first. Again, this story broke last night that there had been a deal signed, so I'm not sure which house would go first. Obviously, both houses have to pass it in order for it to become law. Here's the interesting thing. Sounds like we've got a deal that Democrats and Republicans have agreed on. So the question is, can the president get there? And if the president can't get there, what happens next? Well, potentially you've got a shutdown. Once again, I think that shutdown would be on him. He might not this time invite it to be on him, but if the Congress with Republican and Democratic support votes to pass it and he vetoes it, it's pretty clear why it's not becoming law. Now, the interesting question is, if he vetoes it and the Congress supports it, would the Congress override a veto, which of course requires a 2/3 vote of both chambers? That is a very big deal for the President of the United States. And, conceivably, given how toxic the idea of another shutdown is, you might hear people talking about that.
I'll let you chat with a few callers. David's up first in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, a Republican. David, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, I would just like to hear more discussion of the possibility of the calling for a national emergency. That is lightly discussed publicly, and I'd like to know what that would involve, what could result from that, and also about the calling for a national emergency from the executive order December 21st, 2017, that has already been called for with the executive order calling for the seizure of assets of those involved in human rights abuse and corruption. So what about that? It's already been called.
David, we'll take the questions. You want to start with national emergency?
Yeah, national emergency is a good question. It's something that I think every American and certainly every member of Congress ought to be thinking about. We've been talking about it for a long time. If the president doesn't get what he wants for border security, for a wall in the Congress, maybe he declares a national emergency. The reason to think very hard about that is, look, all presidents get frustrated that Congress doesn't do what they want to do. Barack Obama got frustrated, and Barack Obama famously said, "I've got a phone and a pen," and oh boy, wasn't that horrible. He has a phone and a pen, and he's going to ignore the will of Congress. That was Barack Obama. Trump's version of that is, I might declare a national emergency. Again, every president gets frustrated that they don't get exactly what they want from Congress. The reason to think hard about a national emergency, and I say this to my Republican friends, and I think they get it, if Donald Trump can't get what he wants from the Congress and declares a national emergency, and all of a sudden he starts, let's just say, building a wall on Department of Defense territory along the border, people need to be mindful that if that precedent is set, we're going to have other presidents in the future. Some of them will be Democrats. And if that precedent is set, the American people better get pretty comfortable with a president with pretty enormous powers. So let's just imagine that we have a Democratic president 3 years from now, and that Democratic president decides that climate change is an emergency. I could certainly make the case that climate change is an emergency. Now, does that president bypass Congress for climate change? You know, the opioid emergency. There's, you know, some 50,000 Americans dying every year from drug overdoses from opioids. Is that a national emergency? Why not? Maybe the president should declare a national emergency and do whatever that president wants. So, you know, once you let that genie out of the bottle, you have really changed the way we govern ourselves, and the president has a lot more power relative to the representatives of the people.
You bring up climate change. We spent an hour on this program yesterday hearing from viewers about the Green New Deal, whether they think we needed it. Do you think we need it?
I've been looking at it. Look, the Green New Deal, from my point of view, has some very good ideas in it, including saying climate change is a massive threat to the planet. I believe that. Scientists believe that. Most people believe that. And so I admire the fact that the Green New Deal says we are really going to dedicate ourselves in a very big way to solving that. We're behind, and it is going to affect every American if we don't get on it. The Green New Deal also has lots of other stuff, right? It has a federal job guarantee. Everybody who wants a job apparently would be given a job by the federal government. You know, I'd like to sort of learn more about that. It has a massive improvement in our infrastructure. President of the United States, Donald Trump, ran on a massive improvement in our infrastructure. So bottom line, from this guy's perspective, I think there's a lot of really good ideas in there. There's some ideas that I don't fully understand, that I'm not sure would be a good idea. But look, I'm glad we're talking about a really significant dedication to solving the challenges of climate change.
Michael Newman, Georgia, Democrat, you're up.
Yes, I would just like to talk to the congressman about. It's strange that the politicians that own the states, on the border states, they don't show up with Trump at the border. You know, most of the politicians at the border, for the states in the border, they don't want the border. I think this man here, Trump just this is a case where Trump just he wanted his way or no way, and for him to go into El Paso, Texas, which is Hispanic, one of them places where we took from the Spanish people. It's a disgrace. He make America look bad, and I just really would like to hear from some of the politicians from the border states.
Thanks for the call, Michael.
Yeah, so Michael's exactly right. I mean, this is sort of one of the interesting things. There are Democrats and Republicans who have districts along the southern border. Most famously, my colleague Will Hurd is a Texan Republican who has a district that stretches along a lot of the southern border. Not a single one of them supports a border wall. And there's two reasons, well, there's at least two reasons for that. Number one is, again, the idea of building a border wall out in the middle of nowhere, in deep and hostile desert, that's just a bad idea. That's not where the drugs come in. It's forbidding territory. One of the things that people talk about that are from Texas, other than maybe Senator Cruz, who appears to be a supporter of the wall, is that if the president got his way and he had to, as he put it, use the military version of eminent domain. Now, I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure anybody's sure what that is. But eminent domain is taking private land. And, this Connecticut representative who doesn't know a ton about Texas, I might get some popcorn to watch what happens when the President of the United States goes and tells a bunch of Texan ranchers that he's taken their land.
Remind viewers what the New Democrat Coalition is.
So the New Democrat Coalition, we're 101 members of the House Democratic Coalition. People talk about us as the pragmatists and the moderates. We're people who tend to come out of districts that are purple, by which I mean you've got a lot of independents, maybe even Republican districts. And so we tend to be the ones who are kind of looking to reach across the aisle to find ways to compromise with our Republican friends to actually get something done. So they call us the moderates. That's not a word I like a lot, but we're kind of the center of the Democratic caucus.
We had a caller on this program yesterday say, I grew up as a blue dog Democrat. What happened to all the blue dogs on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I came here in '09, there were a lot of blue dogs. The blue dogs were largely, let's call them kind of more socially conservative, often Southern Democrats. And as the country has sorted itself out, as the South has become more Republican, except in our more urban areas, and the North has become more Democratic, we've lost a lot of those more conservative Southern Democrats. I wouldn't confuse the New Democrat Coalition with the Blue Dogs. Again, the New Democrat Coalition, we tend to come from those more moderate districts, but the Blue Dogs tended to be very socially conservative, which is not something I would say about the New Democrats.
Let's head south. Jordan is in Durham, North Carolina, a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Doing well.
First of all, as a young voter, I understand that Republicans would want border security, and my question to Representative Hines, do you think that we need border security?
Jordan, before you go, you say you're a young voter. How young are you?
I'm 18.
That's great. That's great. Our 18-year-olds don't vote nearly enough. Jordan, thank you for the question. Of course Democrats want border security. Look, governing is hard enough when you don't have the President of the United States throwing complete baloney out there and saying Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats want open borders. They don't want border security. They support drug dealers. That's toxic, completely false rhetoric. Of course, we're very serious about border security. We just know that border security doesn't mean a wall from sea to shining sea. It's not a coincidence that we made it 240 years through our national history without a single person calling for the Trump wall from the Caribbean to the Pacific. That's because it's a bad idea. Now, that doesn't mean that border barriers in urban areas are a bad idea. We have them there. If you go to San Diego, if you go to places like Calexico, there are in dense urban areas walls, slats, fences, barbed wire. But the idea that Democrats don't care about border security is just ridiculous, and frankly, it doesn't help the conversation that is an important one.
To our line for Republicans, Caesars in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Caesar.
Yes, I'm calling about the wall and building a steel fence it would be okay. But why not make it out of concrete, put a solar panel there to collect energy, sell the electricity, use cable, and it would be totally secure, and the wall would make money and pay for itself.
So, Caesar, you see it as an infrastructure investment?
Yes.
Congressman.
Again, hey, creative idea, right? Let's put solar panels on our border barriers. Creative idea. again, the important thing here, and I wish we would have a calmer, more rational conversation about this. Democrats are not opposed to border barriers. There's not a country on the planet that doesn't put barriers around certain parts of its border, including famously, as the president points out, Israel, where there is a wall through the West Bank that is designed to keep terrorists out of their territory. But even Israel does not have a wall around all of its land border. If you go in the north or down into the Negev desert, desert being the operative word there is no wall. There are other barriers. There are other mechanisms. So again, this deal talked about today would appear to have some money for the kinds of barriers that we use today. And again, I don't get too excited about whether we're talking about concrete or steel slats. That's a technical question that our technical people ought to resolve. So a little bit of money available for what we do today, barriers where they are appropriate, is, in my opinion, fine. What is not fine is this dream of a wall that extends across the whole southern border that, no, will not be paid for by Mexico, it turns out, but would be paid for by U.S. taxpayers. And even if we put solar panels on it, that is not a good idea.
Just about 10 minutes left with Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, Democrat. We mentioned your intelligence, House Select Intelligence Committee work at the top of the segment. Can you talk about when Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer, is going to be testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, and in what form he'll be doing that?
Yeah, so my understanding is that he comes in, I believe, next week or the week after. He was supposed to be in testifying to the committee last week. That was rescheduled. The reason for him being called back, of course, is that he now is guilty, it turns out, of lying to our committee. And so, needless to say, the committee, now that he has sort of come clean with the special counsel, the committee is very interested in hearing the truth. He obviously is a critical player in this whole question of Donald Trump and the Trump campaign and what was said and what was done. And so now that he has sort of come clean and is being honest with people, we need him to come back and tell us exactly what the truth was. And of course, we've got follow-on questions because since the House investigation was shut down, lots of things have happened that we would want to talk to him about. Why
do those questions have to take place behind closed doors? I understand it's going to be a non-public hearing when he does come back.
Yeah, that's a good question. Not one I'm 100% sure I know the answer to. I am always in favor of doing as many of these things publicly as we can. I think it's a combination of not wanting this to be the kind of show that some of these open hearings can be, so that we can really get down to business and just ask questions. Nobody's playing to the camera. And that I also think it's partly so that he feels protected. He has expressed concern about retaliation, appropriately so, from the president and his people. So I think part of the deal is to just make sure he feels comfortable and everybody feels comfortable being open and honest with each other.
I wonder what your thoughts are of the chairman of the committee, Adam Schiff, and how comfortable he is becoming a target of the president's criticism. The headline from NBC News this week: the president has plenty of criticism for the new House Intelligence Committee chairman after probes expand. The president tweeting out about his concern about, quote, unlimited presidential harassment.
Well, two things to say. Number one, I wish the dialogue weren't there. The president punching down and attacking members of Congress and attacking the Senate, I think, is pretty unseemly. Number two, if he thinks he's hurting Adam Schiff or any Democrat by singling him out, he's actually making him famous and sort of increasing his support in Democratic circles. And number three, what's really serious here is the president needs to understand, as he apparently doesn't, that it is the constitutional obligation of the Congress of the United States to do oversight, to poke at the administration. And whether it's a Republican president, Democratic Congress, or vice versa, or whatever else, it is the job of Congress to investigate and provide oversight to the White House. That's how our system works.
Have you been to Baltic, Connecticut?
I've never been to Baltic, Connecticut, no.
Mike's in Baltic, a Democrat.
Okay.
Good morning.
Okay.
Hey. Hi, how's it going?
Go ahead, Mike.
Hi. I was wondering, when President Obama did the DACA and the DAPA, did he do that with executive order, or did that go through Congress?
So great question, and I'm going to have to look up Baltic. We've got 169 towns and cities in Connecticut, and I'm still learning about ones I haven't visited. President Obama, when he did the DACA thing, that was an executive order. At the time, he could not get it through Congress. Again, remember what I said earlier about presidents get really frustrated about their ability not to get things done in Congress. So it was done by executive order. It's being litigated in the courts today. There are court cases. The Obama administration's position was, hey, we don't begin to have the resources to deport everybody. Therefore, we have to pick who we are going to deport and who we're not going to deport. And we're going to take a conscious decision not to deport young people who were brought here illegally through no fault of their own, who are in college or who are working. That was the DACA deal. Of course, the vulnerability is because it's not law, it can be challenged by the next president or canceled by the next president, as Donald Trump canceled DACA.
You expressed your concerns about President Trump declaring a national emergency. Did you express concerns at the time about Barack Obama using the executive order to make that happen?
Well, remember, a national emergency is not a normal exercise of presidential power. The courts are going to ultimately determine whether Obama overstepped or not in doing that. But saying we're essentially using prosecutorial discretion and saying, hey, I can't begin to deport everybody, so I'm choosing not to deport these people, that is a very far cry from saying I'm declaring a national emergency and giving myself massive powers. And by the way, we don't have time to get into it, but national emergency powers are truly massive. It's a long way between DACA and a national emergency.
Missouri is next. Jim is a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. What I have noticed with this presidency, starting with the Muslim ban, the Syrian refugees, asshole countries, the Mexicans, when Trump supporters here make America great, they here make America white, which it never was and never will be. Thank you.
Congressman.
Yeah, look, I appreciate Jim's clarity on this issue. I mean, you know, we tie ourselves up in knots in the courts, in the Congress, talking about the Muslim ban. I mean, look, let's just be honest with each other. A Muslim ban, telling people that the undocumented who cross our borders are rapists and criminals, when that is almost by and large exclusively not true. What the president is doing is trying to scare Americans using people usually whose skin is darker than they are, who worship differently than they do. This is a story as old as the Republic. Some leaders will be aspirational and bring us together. Some leaders will drive their campaigns based on fear, and fear of people who think differently, who look differently, and who worship differently. And that is, I think, the story of Donald Trump's ascent to the presidency.
So much focus in the next couple of days will likely be on this deal and the government shutdown. But can you also talk about what's happening on the House floor with the Reclamation of War Powers Act and how it relates to Yemen?
Yeah, so there's a small point to be made, which is that the Senate has acted, and I think the House is going to act this week on saying, hey, our assistance to the Saudis and complicity in the war in Yemen, which is an absolute tragedy, hundreds of thousands of people dead in one of the poorest countries in the world, needs to stop. And that, of course, is one of the constitutional prerogatives of the Congress. If you read the Constitution, it is Congress that gets to declare war. We have gotten away from that, and this is the larger issue in the last 50, 60 years, where Congress has given up that authority to the president. And it's not a Democrat or Republican thing. Look, Barack Obama went to war in Libya. We bombed the tar out of Libya without any congressional approval of that. And that's not a good thing. If you believe in the Constitution, we need to generally get back to the notion that if we're going to commit our fabulously expensive military and, setting aside the money, risk the lives of our young men and women in uniform, it will be the representatives of the people who decide to do that, not one person sitting in the Oval Office.
Jerry is in Sewell, New Jersey, a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, Representative Himes. A couple of statements and a couple of questions. I noticed that originally this all started with going after President Trump for Russian collusion, but it looks like the Democrats are not going to get what they want from Mueller, so they're already trying to discredit some of the stuff he's doing because they're saying that, oh, we're afraid that he's not looking into the finance things. What I want to know is Mueller, is he looking into the fact that Hillary Clinton's campaign went with Russia for the dossier to start this whole thing, are you guys investigating the FISA warrants? Are you investigating Hillary Clinton? Are you investigating all this stuff? Is it two-sided? Are you doing it for both sides? And the other thing I want to say is if you keep using identity politics, I'm so sick of hearing about blacks, whites, Muslims, independent. We are all one people. Don't say that Trump's the one that's doing it about separating. All I hear from you guys is he's about blacks, he's about skin color, he's about – get off that, okay? He's making unemployment lower for the blacks, for the Spanish. Come on, guys. If you really want to work for this country, do it together.
It's Jerry in New Jersey.
Okay, let me take Jerry's second point first. It is not the Democrats who are articulating racial politics. The President of the United States instituted a Muslim ban, and he was very clear about why he did that. The President of the United States decided that our LGBT troops could no longer serve in the military because despite that the fact that there are no facts to support taking transgender troops out of the military, the President decided to do that. The President is the one who uses the language vilifying people who come across our southern border as rapists and drug addicts. So, Jerry, I appreciate your condemnation of identity politics, but this president is all about in his rhetoric, and I just gave you 3 examples about identity politics. And so people like me are going to say, no, Mr. President, you can't vilify the transgender community. You can't vilify Latinos who are whatever it is they're doing. And no, you can't vilify Muslims because they're Muslims. On your first point, Jerry, I would say, first of all, I can only speak for myself. The Democrats don't hope that there was collusion. There is an investigation, bipartisan, in the Senate, and there is an investigation in the House to look at what happened with the Russian intervention in our elections and whether there was any collusion by Donald Trump. That's a fair investigation, and I don't know how it's going to come out. I hope that we get the Mueller results soon. I'm ready for that to happen. But nobody is hoping for one thing or another. Those of us who are involved in those investigations want the truth to come out, and it's pretty hard to get the truth. When George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, the list goes on and on, Michael Cohen are lying to us. That's a problem, and it also, by the way, raises the question of why are you all lying to us? So, look, I, as much as anybody, hope we can move beyond this because, yes, my constituents want the focus to be on infrastructure, on reducing healthcare costs. But in the meantime, there are legitimate questions that the Mueller investigation is looking into. I have looked very closely at the supposed FISA abuses. I will tell you that and the Inspector General of the Department of Justice looked at that. I understand that's really important to Fox News, but it's not true. There was no FISA abuse. And look, we'll learn more about exactly what happened with the Steele dossier, and if Hillary Clinton's campaign committed crimes, those crimes should be pursued by law enforcement. But the idea that that all these investigations are driven primarily by politics, I think is an unfortunate thing because, look, we need to fully understand what Russia did and whether anybody here helped them do it.
We'll have to leave it there, but come back again. We'll chat more about several of these topics.
Thanks, John.
Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut. Up next on...
Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I'm the creator of Mox News. And for the last 15 years, I have been telling you that as long as I have the support of the community that I serve, Mox News will post videos forever. And that's the truth. As long as I have your support, no one could ever make me stop. Unfortunately, currently, less than 1/1% of Mox News viewers ever donate, tip, or contribute anything back. Again, let me make that really clear. Much less than 1/1% ever give anything back. And to those of you who have donated to Mox News, I want to thank you so much because it's because of your generosity that we have been able to bring attention to important videos that millions and millions of eyes would have never seen. And I think that that's an amazing thing that we've been able to make happen together. And I can't thank you enough for helping me make that happen. So it's not too late. If you'd like to see Mox News covering the 2020 presidential election, if you can't imagine the 2020 presidential election without Mox News, please, there's still time. You can make a difference. It's easy to make a contribution, donation, or tip. You can go to moxnews.com, or in the text body of this video, there are clickable links to the Patreon page or to the PayPal page. And again, it should take less than 2 minutes to make a donation. And your donation can make a big difference. So I thank you all. Stay cool. One of these days this war is going to end, and it would be awesome if Mox News could be there to celebrate that day with you.